and with President Donald Trump and Joe Biden still sidelined from the physical campaign trail. They're not even going to be traveling to battleground states at this point to deliver their acceptance speeches later this month. A lot of those resources are going to be directed towards advertising to help get their message out. At this point, the Biden campaign has taken a pretty broad view of the map, certainly a lot broader than I think we had expected at this point. They announced this week that they reserved $280 million in TV and digital ads in 15 states for the fall. So that includes not only those core battlegrounds we've talked about a lot on this podcast, but states both Trump and Clinton won fairly comfortably in 2016. And that's an expansion from where he is now. He's currently on the air in 7 states. Trump's campaign had previously reserved $145 million in TV ads across 11 states starting after Labor Day. But the campaign has recently downsized its presence on the airwaves. They're only actually running ads in 4 states and in D.C. as well. But they're focusing on early voters in some of those swing states who can already start requesting ballots or even voting early in person starting in September. Francesca, what does all of this sort of tell you about the way both campaigns are viewing the map now that we're less than 90 days out here?
Well, for President Trump, to start with, even as he says that mail-in voting isn't safe, and by the way, he says now that it's safe in Florida because Ron DeSantis, a Republican, is governor, and Rick Scott, a Republican, was governor before that, and didn't really have a clear way to differentiate between Florida and Nevada, a state that he said was not safe when he was asked about this at a press conference this week. But even given all of that, the Trump campaign seems to be acknowledging at this point that people are going to vote by mail in those early states, and they need to be reaching out to them. You also heard them this week try to make an argument to get the debates moved up. The first one is supposed to be at the end of September. They want to see one earlier. They also want to see or see one added, a 4th one in order to get one earlier. So they're really starting to feel the heat from those voters who either vote absentee or through mail-in ballots at the beginning of the month.
And Dave, this is something that you've been reporting on over the past few weeks, both where Trump has sort of been redirecting some of his ad buys recently, but also the fact that, the November 3rd election is technically, only a little less than 90 days away, but we're really not that far away from voters being able to already start casting their ballots in a lot of key battleground states. What do you make of the Trump campaign's ad strategy, at least at this point in time?
So I think the biggest difference that has changed since a month ago is that Michigan appears to be off the map. The core sort of 3 battleground states that we talk about ad nauseum over and over, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, Republicans have scaled back spending in Michigan. Not only the Trump campaign is completely off the air there, but the super PAC is off the air there. I also think that other Republican outside groups are not playing there. The Club for Growth just went on the air with a anti-Biden blitz, a bunch of spots hitting him on taxes, his economic record. They chose to go on in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Arizona. And if you look at the polling averages, Michigan is the worst positioned state for Trump. He's about down 8 points there to Biden, whereas Pennsylvania and Wisconsin are closer. So I think that is the piece of the electoral puzzle that has changed. Everything else is pretty much the same. You still have those other 5 battlegrounds, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, North Carolina, Florida, that are still in play. The campaign's dumping money in. But as you said, the Biden campaign, because their fundraising has picked up so significantly, is now trying to expand the map even further, putting some money into Texas, Georgia. I would pause because when the Biden campaign first announced they were playing in Texas, they got a lot of media coverage about it, but that's all it was. It was only about $65,000 they spent, which is not even a drop in the bucket in a state like Texas. So it's important to look at how much these campaigns are spending in these states rather than just looking at that they are spending. And we won't know those details for a while.
Right. Well, and another thing I wanted to note, Dave, because, we have been talking a lot over the course of this campaign, obviously about those core battleground states, and then about some areas where the Biden campaign thinks they could maybe reach into. And you mentioned some of those: Texas, Georgia, Iowa, or Ohio. But I was a little surprised to see that they are planning to spend in some states that Hillary Clinton won pretty handedly in 2016. Is that them? Like you said, they have really picked up their fundraising, and they're almost at parity now in terms of cash on hand with the Trump operation at this point. Is that them just being extremely safe here and not taking anything for granted?
Yeah, imagine if they were to win Wisconsin, but then somehow drop Nevada, right? Like the PTSD from 2016, I think, is still infused in the Biden campaign. And look, if you talk to them back in April, they weren't sure about their fundraising. Like, there are a lot of questions about Biden as a fundraiser. He didn't raise a lot of money during the primary, was outraised by most of his opponents in the primary. So there was a question. So they weren't going to show their hand then, but in the last 2 months, the fundraising has come in as the party is unified around Biden. They're now almost at parity with Trump. So they're saying, okay, we're going to expand the map and we're going to protect places that, look, Hillary won, but only won by a couple points. Minnesota, Nevada. You hear New Hampshire brought up a lot. I hear that in conversations with the Trump campaign, that could be their new path, sort of piecing together other parts of the electoral map. So the Biden campaign wants to have a presence there and wants to play defense as well, now that they have the resources to do so.
Right. And Francesca, it wasn't that long ago that the Trump campaign was talking a big game about potentially expanding the map and going into states that Hillary Clinton won in 2016. Now it's, and again, as I had mentioned, post Labor Day, they still do have ad reservations in a lot of other states. Of course, those could change. They're only reservations. That money hasn't been spent yet. But at least right now, it seems like they are taking a much narrower view of the map. Do you expect that to continue, that they really are going to only hone in on kind of a handful of states here to try and get as close to kind of recreating that path to victory that they took in 2016?
So they're also just taking a beat, is sort of the way that they're putting it, right? They had one campaign manager and he had one strategy, and now Bill Stepien has taken over, and you've seen the president even start to use different language to address certain things since Bill Stepien has taken over. I was struck that how the president, in a call with Georgia voters, was talking about public safety. Now, his message was that you will not be safe if Joe Biden is president, but that is different than law and order, which is the way that he had been describing it. Frank Luntz, the pollster, had really cautioned the campaign against doing that. He said it wasn't working with voters. Now you hear Donald Trump switching and pushing it as a safety message against Joe Biden. So they're clearly listening to some of the criticism that they had received even from their allies and applying that to the campaign. So you could see them go back up potentially in some of these states with different messages, but they're clearly, the shakeup doesn't just extend to the campaign manager, it extends all across the board. As far as the map is concerned, they're still saying that they could win in New Hampshire. They're still pushing Minnesota. They've added resources in the state of Minnesota from where they were in 2016. New Hampshire still seems a potential believable pickup opportunity. And while it does not have as many electoral votes as a Pennsylvania, certainly in a tight situation, it could tip the balance. I wrote about that earlier the year. I still think that's true. Minnesota, to me, after the death of George Floyd, is not the same Minnesota as 2016 when you're looking at that map. And they have not acknowledged that to this point.
Right. Yeah. New Hampshire. Yeah, it's a good point, and Dave had brought it up as well. But I was thinking recently, Francesca, about that story you had written earlier this year about how that's always been kind of a traditional battleground state, and like you said, certainly not that many electoral votes. But it seems like that you would expect to see a little more spending there from the Biden campaign or from the Trump campaign to this point. Dave, any other states that you think that we should be kind of keeping an eye out for that might come a little more into the mix as being at the center of the map between now and the election? Or do you think that we're even with all of these sort of expansions in spending, that it's still more or less going to be decided in the states that we always thought that it would be? Yeah,
I think the core 5 to 6 sliding Michigan off now, at least for the time being, since the Trump campaign is not engaged there. If I had to add the next state, I would sort of put Ohio and Georgia, two very different states demographically, sort of the opposite ends of the coalition that Biden would have to put together. But the polling there has been pretty good. The difference is Georgia obviously has 2 Senate races going on, so a highly engaged electorate sort of down the ballot. Ohio, has sort of complained, the Ohio Democratic Party has complained, like, you got to pay attention to us, like, Biden can win here. They just don't have other big races. So I'm watching those states to see, like, will other groups really start to pour in? We've seen priorities hold off, other Democratic groups hold off, saying, whoa, we got to take care of business first. But I'm keeping my eye on Ohio and
Right.
Georgia.